Hey guys, it's Am. And before you click off this video thinking this is simply going to be another compilation like the others, it's not, kinda. Having reviewed everything with Gaiden directly in the title, I wanted to make another more complete one of these. But seeing how some of these videos were made 2 or so years ago at this point, a lot's changed. From how the videos are made, some of my general thoughts on them, and that combined with a lot of behind the scenes stuff happening, made me want to make a video like this. So in short, this compilation will contain all the videos like normal, but at the ending of each of them, you'll hear my newer thoughts on them and everything that happened around them. But with that out of the way, I'll let you guys enjoy the video. Today we gotta talk about Garuda, a character from a spin-off HNK manga. At first, honestly, I didn't care for him at all, and I wasn't even gonna make a video on him or anything related to him. Until I turned my game sounds up and I hear this. They got my man Jotaro/Daisuke Ono to voice Garuda. This is literally the only reason I became interested in this character at all. So I went to go play his event, which summarizes and goes over what happens in the spin-off manga he's from, and it's not great. I know I didn't mention this video in the list I gave in my update video, but it caught me so off guard how this manga is written that I thought it'd be a needed detour. Now what's wrong with Garuda and his manga? I thought instead of me just flapping my gums about it, I thought we could go over it together so we can all come to our own conclusions. But before we start, since I'm going to be summarizing a lot of what happens, let me give you a quick rundown of Garuda himself. He's a forgotten star, similar to Ryuga with his own fighting style. He has some personal beef with the Nanto General and is apparently really strong. Perhaps a little bit too strong. His design is very HNK2-esque. You can definitely tell he's a spin-off character. As compared to everyone else in HNK1, he doesn't really fit, especially with all the colors that come out of his character. There are a few other things I want to talk about for this character in manga, but we're gonna have to get into the story for that, so without further ado, let's get right into Garuda's manga. We start off with Garuda beating up some of Keno's forces and we get his design partially revealed to us. We then find out that he wants to defeat the Nanto General because she didn't help his mother or his people. As a motivation, it's okay. I didn't really mind it. It's a bit edgy, but I can accept it. We're then told he's wandering around trying to find the last Nanto General's base as his map appears to not work. How did he get a map to the last Nanto General, you may be asking? Well, while he's walking around and cuts them getting the map from Oigar that appears blank, like I said earlier. Remember this, because we're gonna come back to this very soon. Oigar, one of Ro's forces, had a map to the Nanto General. One we can presume they've had for a while. Just write that down in your little notebook. Going back to him in the present, he walks around angsty for a while until he runs into Yuza, who's casually pissing off of a balcony and was apparently just trying to piss on him for some reason. Oh, Yuza.
You're a fucking asshole.
Yuza teases Garuda for a bit and then they fight before Yuza just kind of memes out of the way and leaves Garuda. Garuda gets frustrated and for some reason looks down at his map and he notices it leads directly to the Nanto General's tower. How is this map not blank now, you may be asking? Well, he's standing under the one hole in the roof while the star of the compassionate mother shines down on his map, of course.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Yes, Gary Stu over here, through a heap of plot convenience, stumbled upon the location of the Nanto General. Bullshit. I can't believe that Ro would stumble upon a map to the Nanto General and then not put that thing through every kind of testing imaginable. It's such a random fucking thing to trigger a map. It might as well just be a COD Easter egg. They even acknowledge how bullshit this is. Let alone, I can't ignore that they just made up a MacGuffin for Garuda here to stumble on. I could probably make a whole video about this chapter and how much this part pisses me off alone, but let's continue. So then he just shows up at the Nanto General's fort. No, I didn't cut anything out. He literally just kind of pops up there. And then quickly cuts back and apparently Garuda joined Ro's forces and copy and paste Ryuga's reasons for joining. Even though I really don't think they fit his character at all, but whatever. We got an even bigger problem because we're told that Ro knows that Garuda knows where the Nanto General is. Which is, oh, I don't know, the whole fucking plot of the latter half of HNK1? The story's placement in the timeline is right before Ryuga's arc, as they say that the last Nanto General is the only star of Nanto remaining. So why the fuck does he not rate it right now? Like seriously, this asshole could have skipped 2 arcs if he apparently knew about this early. Why doesn't Ro just come here and go, "That's cute, Garuda," Anyways, move. It's time for the adults to handle things. Or just come with him and destroy everything right now. I simply just don't believe that Ro would just let this slide and leave it to Infinite over here. The worst part about this plot hole in this story is it's entirely unnecessary. Ro is only in one page of this manga, and his army doesn't even help Garuda with his raid or show up in any part past this point. So I'm really trying to figure out why the writer even thought it was necessary to mesh Garuda with Keno's army. But whatever, let's just continue. When he reaches, he runs into Huey's army and eventually Huey himself, who I must admit looks pretty cool in this art style. I guess it's time for some Huey action? I admitted in the other video I think Huey was really underused, and I can't wait to see what he does. What the fuck, guys? He insta-claps Huey? Huey gets no damn love in this series. All Heavenly King Garuda over here one-shots him too. I know we have to make Garuda matter, and Huey in canon kinda sucks, but this blue-balled me really hard. Why even make Huey a general? If he fights anyone with a name, he's gonna lose every time, apparently. Also, after he loses, Garuda spares him as he pities the people who serve the Nanto general. The real reason is the writer noticed he can't kill people, as this is technically a prequel, so they had to write a way around it. He then begins killing Huey's army members and everyone else that's not named serving the general, so it's not even an excuse they kept up with, but let's keep going. Rihaku is a bit startled by the fact that some Nanto user is coming after the Nanto general, so he whips open his book of stars that I guess he just has and begins reading. But oh Pog, Shuren's here! I can't wait to see what... Oh, okay, cool, okay. He stalled long enough for Huey to get here. Now he's about to get up. Look at this cool ass panel. I can't wait for it. What the hell? Why are these losers even in this story? They're literally only here to boost egos. Many people I've seen talk about this mention how this is just a repeat of Ro's assault and it's just lazy. Well, that's a part of it. The main issue is Ro was built up to be this ultimate menace, and we've seen his strength time and time again, and we know he's an absolute threat. When it's Garuda, nobody cares. It's just some guy that someone made up to just shit on everybody. It makes them both look even more incompetent than they did when they fought Ro, who absolutely shit on both of them anyways. And it just makes Garuda even more unlikable, because it doesn't even feel like he's really earned the ability for us to think that he's casually shafting these two. We see Shuren sound like a little bit of a bitch, and then we cut to Fudo, who's on his way. He then runs into Yuza, who says he doesn't want to fight for the general anymore, which is the only thing this manga does that doesn't cause more questions than answers. It can somewhat explain why Yuza wasn't with the other Nanto chariots when Ro comes around. I wish it wasn't in this manga in particular, but I think it's only fair to give props when necessary. So Fudo heads there by himself. We then cut to Rihaku finding Garuda star in the Nanto dictionary, and Garuda feeling sorry for people who serve the general. He eventually stumbles into Rihaku, and after giving an angsty speech, he steps on one of Rihaku's traps. And since Garuda is just the coolest guy ever, he's pretty much unaffected by all of his traps, and even catches himself on the falling floor that worked on Ro. After Garuda gets up, Rihaku prepares to fight. Oh boy, I can't wait to... I'm not gonna use that joke 4 times in a row. To be fair to Rihaku, he actually throws hands unlike the other two. I actually got my hopes up for him to win, as he was landing some real good hits. And in the final panel, I felt like if he pulled his arms up, he could have just cut through Hyo's strife here, but you know. Gotta remember, we aren't reading Rihaku Gaiden, so after all the cool shit he does, Garuda instantly drops him. Just as a note, past this point I can't find a single website that goes past chapter 4 in English, so I'm gonna have to use the summary that they give in H&K Legends, so I'm basically gonna be summarizing a summary for you guys. While Rihaku's on the ground, he tells Garuda his mother wouldn't want him to attack the Nanto general. Garuda gets mad and prepares to kill him, but then Big Cheese Fudo smashes through the door and prepares to fight him, along with Huey and Shuren, who both crawl up to their feet again. Garuda then proceeds to beat all of them at the same time. This is just a fucking joke, dude. I wouldn't be surprised if Ro and Kenshiro stepped in the room right now and Garuda just sneezed on them and they both exploded at this point. Huey and Shuren weren't ever shown to have beaten anyone, but this just makes them look like shit. And as for Fudo, I simply just don't believe he would have lost to Garuda. Anyways, after he dicks the chariots again, Yuria, in a kinda scuffed drawing, pulls out a mask that looks like Garuda's mom's, and apparently his mom trusted Yuria and they were cool with each other. Garuda gets mad, for some reason, and prepares to attack Yuria. He then pulls a Uno reverse card and breaks his own mask and spares Yuria, as he says if he kills her he'd waste his mother's efforts. But he says if things don't change, he'll be back, and then he leaves and is never heard of or mentioned by any of the cast again. And that's the end of the manga. Now that everything's out there, how do I feel about it? I think it suffers from the same problem most of the Gaidens do. How do you make a story important and matter, but at the end of the day make it not matter so it doesn't interfere with the show? Most Gaidens go off on side stories and locations that Kenshiro and the gang have never been to before, so that's relatively fine. But we're going off of characters that already existed. If he fought made up characters like Dewey and Shitrag, it wouldn't have mattered, but using established characters just to have them get destroyed will never make me like a character. If I had to compare it to anything, I compare it to something like Devora. Just making a whole new character, expecting you to believe that they've been there, met these people, and did all these things, but that's just not what happened. The other thing is, unlike most Gaidens that use established characters for prequels and therefore had to tie back into the main story somehow, this one literally had no reason to attempt to do that, so I'm not even sure why they tried to. I also hate how they just made things happen for Garuda. He lucks into the map of the Nanto General. He lucks into Ro not stopping him for some reason. He lucks into also not running into Kenshiro for this whole manga, because honestly, I think he would have made it end really fast. Honestly, it would have been funny if this whole thing happened a bit later. Could you imagine if he announced he was gonna kill Yuri and he looks back and it's just it's just so convenient that everything played out the way it did for him. Too convenient. The whole story really just feels like someone wrote a fanfiction about their OC they thought was cool. It even has all the trademarks of being a fanfiction, as it's short, coincidental, and things don't really make sense when you think about them for more than 5 seconds. Out of the 3 non-canon HNK stories I've read, those being Ray and Jaggy Gaiden, and then this is the worst one. The worst part about that is, I would say both of those are 5 out of 10 stories anyways. I'd put this one at like a 4 or a 3. It doesn't really make any sense, and it doesn't really accomplish anything either. While the other 2 at least gave you something to build onto the characters and establish why they may have acted a certain way, this story doesn't really do that unless you want to count Yuza, who only really got 2 or 3 panels for his plot development. And as a little small nitpick, I don't really think Daisuke Ono's voice fits this character. His voice fits more cool but somewhat mature characters, if that makes sense. I know the Garuda manga creator may be behind why he's voiced by Daisuke, as he thinks that Garuda's just the coolest guy around. Or maybe the game creators just snagged him off the street, but after having read this manga, I imagine he sounds more like Raiden from Metal Gear Revengeance or some voice similar to that. No offense to Raiden or whoever voiced him, as I think Raiden's cool, but he has more of an angsty teen cool voice that I feel would fit Garuda a bit more than Jotaro does. Well, there's a few little problems with this video. Like how I said practically every single character's name wrong, with Ro and Uyghur being prime examples. The only reason my pronunciations were so bad was because I hadn't seen the show in a while at this point, so they weren't exactly fresh in my memory. And when I'd ask around, as I said in the pronunciation video, which came out right after this, literally no one I asked wanted to tell me how to say them. That's probably my main issue with this video, but I don't blame past me for it that much. The background scroll was a little bit crunchy looking because I didn't really know how to implement it at the time, but I freeballed with what I had. The audio mixing on my voice wasn't great. If you're curious, I still use the same mic I did back then. Just I learned how to clean up audio a lot better. Also, I ended up saying that Ray and Jaggy Gaiden were both 5 out of 10s at the end of this video, mainly because my memory of them was pretty foggy since I had read them a while ago at this point. And I really regret saying that because I rated both of those very differently when I got around to reviewing them separately. And a little fun fact, the comic scroll in the background isn't actually of HNK. It's from Redo of a Healer, which I reviewed a month or so before this video. We're going to be talking about Ray Gaiden, the most controversial Gaiden that's been published. No matter where you go in this story, some people say it's good and maybe even the best, and others will just say it's straight up gutter trash. I remember reading it before I started doing YouTube again and thinking it was okay, but the more people started mentioning certain, events in this story I noticed I forgot about, I called my old opinion into question. And for that and the fact that Ray Gaiden characters just got added into HNK Legends about 3 months ago when I wrote the script before everything ended up breaking, I wanted to go over Ray Gaiden today and see what I think about it now. Just as a quick disclaimer, unlike the Garuda Gaiden video, I'm gonna be heavily summarizing a lot of parts of this story to keep this video relatively short. As unlike Garuda Gaiden, this book's got quite a bit of length to it, so it wouldn't make sense to cover literally everything that happens in this book the way I did in Garuda's story. Also, I'm gonna have to censor a lot of parts in this book to keep YouTube happy because, as I stated earlier, this book's got a lot of moments in it. With that out of the way, let's get into the most controversial Gaiden in HNK. So our story starts off with Ray thinking back to how he lost Ari at her wedding, along with possibly one of the best Jaggy drawings we've ever seen. And when he promises to get revenge, we then cut to the present where Ray's traveling with a bunch of slave traders to sell off some women.
What?
No, alright. I know that sounds bad.
So let me specify. This book's set before the events of HNK 1, so he's still in his whole angsty phase about the losing his whole sister thing. And he's doing some less than admirable actions at the start of this book. The kind of things that you would believe early Ray would be doing. Ray's traveling with these slave traders because he knows there's a chance he'll run into whoever has a sister by traveling with them. He says he'll protect their lives until they reach the town they're gonna sell the slaves at. When they reach, the buyer starts some problems, and when Ray's called in, he betrays the slavers he was traveling with and says he only serves the strong. After that's all dealt with, he asks the buyer if he knows where his sister is. After name dropping Ray's next destination, Asgarzul, he says something about Ari and Ray insta-kills him for it. Then he says he won't give up faith in finding Ari before heading back out into the wasteland. If you're wondering what happened to all those slaves or if Ray helped them, nah, he just left them where they are. This is still angsty Ray, so he just leaves them in the middle of his angsty Linkin Park speech. Some bandits stumble into Ray and his looks alone scare them off. They drive away on their motorbike while Ray runs after them on foot, Roberta style. And while they're driving, they see some random woman in the desert, so they try to snag her, but surprise, it's a little dude with a crossbow. So after the bandits are dealt with and the little dude stating that the loot's theirs, they threaten Ray by saying they know Nanto. They talk for a bit with the little dude saying his name's Yu and that he's also headed to Asgarzul. So after Ray threatening a literal child, Yu says he'll take him there and begins explaining Asgarzul is like a prison for women and it's a bad place. We then get a little traveling montage of them heading to the city. So as you can guess, Yu's gonna be our discount bat for this story. As for the story itself, other than Ray angsting, it's a little bit dry at the start, but I assure you it's gonna start picking up. If that's a good or a bad thing, you'll find out for yourself real soon. So Yu and Ray reach the city and Yu states it's the red light district of bloodshed, with its reputation meant to exceed Cassandra's, which, because from what we saw of Cassandra, I don't know if I believe that, and from what you're about to see, I don't know if you'll believe it either. Anyways, Yu warns Ray how dangerous the city is, and then they both get inside and... well, I guess he did say it's the red light city, so this does make sense. So after I almost call Chris Hansen on these two girls, Yu blurts out they're here to sell their skills. For some reason, because it kinda doesn't make sense in this context, but whatever. The goon squad rolls up and challenges Ray, and as he asks if they've seen his sister, they make some rather tasteless remarks. Just gonna pause the recap here and state in this book, it 100% sucks to be a woman. I can't really get into it yet, but there's a few good reasons I mentally call this Ray do of a healer. So back to the story. Before Ray can fight all these guys, a bunch of women known as Eva's Valkyries break up the fight, with their leader Frida asking if they can buy Ray's skills, and also stating that they work for Queen Eva, the ruler of Asgarzul. Frida says she'll guide Ray around the city. She starts expositioning and they end up in a bar. They then start negotiating about buying his skills and Ray simps asking for girls as payment. Frida says he can have anyone, or even her, which kinda weird for basically the Queen's Royal Guard to be offering Punani on the first time she's meeting Ray, or anybody to be honest, but whatever. But Ray wants that high tier and he wants the queen. While they're talking, she strolls up and pretty much says, yeah, we can bang. She pretty much says she banged a few of the Nanto stars, and then after a very, I could tell this story was written by a guy line, I didn't expect any of this when I opened this book. So after Ray pretty much gets a post-nut nap, he finds out Eva's been murdered! Yes, this character really did only exist to drop some spiritual lines and then die. But regardless, Ray's trying to understand why Eva's dead, as he doesn't remember killing her at the end of their fun time session. The Valkyries eventually arrive, which I really don't understand because that's implying that they left the door unlocked, seeing as they didn't kick it down, which is kind of weird in itself that someone can just have sex with the queen and the door would be unlocked. But, you know, whatever, let's keep going. And they get mad at Ray, who just stood there like a doofus until they arrived, I guess. And his only defense is, it wasn't me. The Valkyries attack him, and Ray rips their clothes off. Honest to God, us HNK fans are lucky this manga isn't well known. Scenes like this would have gotten us splattered on Twitter. So anyways, the naked Valkyries attempt to scuffle with him. I'd show you the scene, but I honestly don't trust YouTube to not screw me over. Until he jumps out of a window and goes into hiding. A manga where the main character does a heinous crime to a female queen involving specs that leads to them hopping out of a window and sneaking around the kingdom? Sounds kind of familiar, but I'm not sure why. So anyways, the Valkyries wound on Ray makes him pass out, and then we get a flashback to his youth and his training, while his his little fangirl watches. What's her name? She's so irrelevant to this story, I forgot she existed, so honestly, you don't really need to know. When he finishes standing on spikes, young Yuta appears. She was there too, I guess. And of course, since it's Yuta, they almost fight, but Rei's current master Rufu and his wife Rinri show up to break up the fight. Since I'm trying to keep these flashback sections short, Rufu says Rei needs more training and orders him to stand over the Cliff of Darkness. What's the Cliff of Darkness, you may be asking? Rei stands over a cliff, and it's dark. He has to stand there for 10 days. Yuta tries to get Amiiba to hurt Rei. Rei falls and Rinri saves him. She basically says you have to learn the two halves of Nanto. Basically like the hard and soft fists of Hokuto. She teaches him her soft style. Rei goes back to complete his Dark Cliff training. Amiiba jumps him and gets Ultra Instincted. Rei finishes his trial, impresses Rinri and Rufu, and Yuta has a quarter-life crisis. After all that, Rei wakes up to a mysterious woman, which is revealed to be you on the literal next page, so I'm not sure what the point of the one-page cliffhanger was, but whatever. Rei tells you what's going on and that he killed Eva. While they're discussing leaving, these guys show up and slap you. Rei bodies these invaders and their boss seems to get cocky. Rei reveals the mysterious man's face and it's... This guy's apparently some random dude trained in another Nanto style. He was never shown before now, so I think it's a bit weird they chose to reveal him like this, but it's whatever. They fight for a bit before Zahn, this OC's name, says that they should join sides and reveals that he's with the masked guys that we've been seeing so far. Rei agrees, seeing as the Valkyries don't like him very much at the moment, and Zahn takes him to his hideout in town. There the masked soldiers say they're going to be raiding tonight and do unspeakable words that can't be said here to the women. They start their assault with Rei joining them as he really doesn't have anywhere else to go at the moment. The Valkyries appear to stop the raiders, and after dropping her in-game line, her and Rei fight. Well, fight would be a strong word since it ends in like 2 panels, but Rei wins, knocks out Frida and all of the Valkyries at about the same time. Which really makes me wonder why they guard the queen, cause they kinda suck. I don't know, it's just the fact that the HNK verse is known for having martial artists literally everywhere, even sometimes when it doesn't make sense. Even the bad guys have a martial artist on their team. It's kind of funny how Eva found a group of people to defend her who have no abilities at all. But it's whatever. And then we get more uncomfortable dialogue. Look, I was gonna wait to the end of the review to say it, but it comes up so much I feel like I have to address it. I'm not offended by this, but I feel like if you're gonna throw this kind of subject around, you can't throw it around willy-nilly and it needs purpose. Literally every single dude character except Rei has talked about graping women. They don't have any particular reason to want to do that. They're just all creeps. I'm aware in Base Fist of the North Star they had characters say they were gonna have fun with women, but it was never shoved in your face this much and to this degree. If they wanted to murder them for some sort of disrespect, saying this is our town, and literally do nothing else to them, nothing would have changed about this story. It's parts like this that heavily drag down this story, and I think is the reason many people hate it. The writer seems like a nice guy from that message he left at the end of the last HNK event, but all the villains are written like angsty incels. I can dislike someone for reasons other than them violating women. He could have thought of literally any other way for you to dislike an antagonist in this story, but anyways, let's just get back to the recap. Frida almost gets raped on screen, but then a mysterious man saves her. After Rei's victory, we see him briefly in a bar before he decides to go somewhere we aren't fully aware of yet. Frida wakes up and sees she's still in a cell. The Valkyries manage to jimmy the lock, but after they get out, they run into Rei, and after a brief attack attempt from Frida, he puts her down. Again. God, she's trash. Anyways, the Valkyries are told Rei pretended to join the bad guys, and after some explaining, they're all on the same page. Shin gets word of all that's happening in Asgarzul in a picture I can't fully show you, and prepares to send his army to take the city, but Amiiba tries to instigate they can't, and while that's happening, Rei begins thinking about who it could be, and he believes it's his old master Rufu. We cut to Rei helping some random lady that's being harassed by some guys, and when the lady looks over at Yu, she calls her Lady Yu. So it turns out Yu was actually Queen Eva's adopted little sister this whole time, which I think is kind of a stupid plot twist, to be honest. There's only one panel where we see Yu react to Lady Eva's death, and then she never seems affected by it ever again, even though it's her sister who saved her from like being homeless, as we're about to see really soon. And along with that, it brings into question why none of the Valkyries, Eva's personal guard, know what her sister looks like, or know what she sounds like at all. I just think it's a bit of bad writing. We then get some admittedly sad panels where we find out how Yu and Eva originally met. Yu then runs away and is in her thoughts until she's knocked out of them when she sees the Valkyries are about to get publicly executed. So after some more incel energy, Rei appears, and before fighting Zahn, he has to fight tall, military man. Apparently this guy somehow has a body count comparable to Devil's Rebirth, which I don't believe at all, because this is literally just a dude with a bag, and Devil's Rebirth was a whole ass creature. But after his gimmick gets revealed, which is that the big guy is being mind controlled by the little guy, and he puts people in nets and hits you with them, yes, that's literally his only power. He doesn't know any martial arts. Apparently Bagman over here is Mr. Mass Murderer. But Yu runs out of nowhere and grabs the bell mind controlling the big guy, and Rei immediately one-shots both of them. I'm sorry, I know this is small, but this was a dumb villain. Rei has Nanto. Why couldn't Rei one-tap him before? I fail to believe Rei couldn't cut this dude into pieces before he swings. But enough of the logic, let's move on to the next fight. Rei looks over at Zahn and prepares to rumble. Rei easily overpowers Zahn and humiliates him. And before he can finish him off, the character who saved Frida before is properly introduced. Rima here begins introducing himself to Rei. And while they're talking, Yuta's army arrives outside, but Rima still wants to fight Rei. So while Rima's female friend here helps prepare everyone to fight off the Nanto army, Rima and Rei got to trade blows. After some cool panels and us being told Rima was made in some sort of lab somewhere, they're interrupted by Rei's master armor tightening through the wall. He mocks Rima and confirms that he killed Eva. They all then turn their attention to Yuta, who wasn't really part of Rufu's plan. So Rufu here near instantly wipes out a huge chunk of Yuta's army. If you're thinking, wow, this guy looks like a Nanto Kaio, that's the same vibe I got too. I like Rufu as our main villain, but it's really just because he's dollar store Kaio, and he's just riding off of normal Kaio's coolness. Anyway, this is where the book starts to feel really bloated. To be honest, both Rei and Rufu are right here. Their final fight could have been right here, and I know we'd missed some of that sick original Rei Gaiden lore, but meh. And it's really bad I'm starting to feel this right now because there's like 20 or so more chapters left, somehow. So like every anime villain's first encounter, Rei gets immediately one-shot shafted. Rufu spares him because he's too weak to kill, and then he just kind of fucks off. We get the scene where the main characters begin talking about how big and scary the villain is. Then the main Nanto stars and this guy discuss what they should do and decide, we could just let Rei handle it. We get some conversations about Yu becoming queen, along with arranging a celebration for Eva's legacy, but as they're doing that, Rufu just sits on his chair and prepares to crash it. What, you thought I was joking when I said he fucked off? No, he literally could have bodied every single person in town if he wanted to when he beat Rei, but I guess he just wasn't feeling it that day. The celebration starts, but Rufu's boys invade, but what's this? It was a trap? Man, who could have thought a celebration held right after the town almost got destroyed would be a trap? Anyways, the Valkyries begin killing Rufu's forces until the big man himself appears. He even stole Kaio's horse. But anyways, Rufu toasts her as expected, and before Rufu kills her, she's saved by Rima. If you're wondering why he showed up again, he's apparently one of Eva's Valkyries, and Frida is a beast person just like Rima. Rei kills Zahn. Yeah, he showed up again, but he felt so irrelevant I didn't bother mentioning him. And Frida roasts Rufu. But she still gets shit on until Rima joins her, and then we're told that united, they may just... well, they did say may. At least Rima got a good shot in. Anyways, Rufu seems to take the city, with no retaliation from anyone else, because we literally don't see him fight Rei or anybody after Frida and Rima lose, and ends up having a conversation with Yu before he marries her? I'm not entirely sure what's meant to be conveyed in this scene, but it doesn't really look great no matter how you want to interpret it. Yu calls Rufu an incel and Rei comes back again, for the third time. Luckily we're at the end of the book this time, so you know he's gonna win, but I like that Rufu just keeps not killing people, when he definitely should've, since, you know, he wanted to conquer everything. Like, why did Rufu just go, oh well, see y'all later, and leave again? Why do y'all keep letting this man just leave? Rei didn't even fight him the second time. But it's whatever. We get anime scene 207, where everyone begins hyping up the main character before they fight the big bad man. We see everyone set up for Rei and Rufu's fight in this pit, with all the Nanto stars showing up and even Rao appearing to watch. Wait, how is the Nanto general here if Fury is still with Shin? I'ma give the writer an excuse in saying that's just someone pretending to be her, but it's a bit odd they didn't just put Rihaku here so I wouldn't even have to think about that. Back on topic, Rei finally arrives and our final battle begins. As for the fight itself, it's pretty okay. The only problem here is that it has agnologia syndrome. Rufu here literally one-shot Rei 3 days prior. Now all of a sudden we're supposed to believe he can even stand a chance against him. I don't believe he just suddenly got tough enough or fast enough without training to even pretend to fight Nanto Kaio here, but whatever. He goes Ray into getting mad, and Angry Ray does this. Keep in mind, this is meant to be pre-HNK1 introduction Ray doing all this crazy OP looking shit. But while Ray's acting wild and unable to get any hits in, Yu jumps down and almost gets killed, which brings Ray back to his senses. So in short, Ray learns Rinri's Ultra Instinct and does a Water Bird Spirit Bomb? Despite how cool it looks in that panel, it's just the thing he does to Yuta in the show. Either way, it hits Rufu and Rufu ends up dying, and the next day, Ray prepares to leave, but not before cutting up Yu's clothes. It then cuts to Ray's first appearance that we see in HNK1, and then the manga ends. Okay, well, that happened. While I dabbled in my thoughts here and there in the review, I feel like I got a few more things to say about this book. It's a lot worse than I remember. I'm not gonna exaggerate and go, oh, it's the worst thing I've ever read in my life, like a lot of people seem to say, but it definitely has issues that I blanked out before. Mostly just how many times that rape is mentioned or implied. As I said earlier, it's just thrown around. They focus on it too hard when it really didn't need to be involved in the story at all. I guess the end of the world and all, so I'm not saying I don't get it for a group of post-apocalyptic villains to do that kind of thing, but it doesn't need to be hammered over and over again that that's what's gonna happen, and it drags the story down. And keep in mind, I cut out a lot of instances where it's mentioned. Second, this book is long. It's entirely too long for its own good. While I don't like Garuda Gaiden, at least it was short. A lot of this story past chapter 20 felt bloated. Like, if you crammed the final Rufu fight into his first appearance and still made him fight everybody else in the town that he fought in the other two fights, I don't think you'd miss much. I think there's nuggets of a good story in here, but it feels failed in execution because of its length. Like I said, Rima and Frida are cool in concept. Ray helping an all-female city could have been cool, as we saw the lack of respect he seemingly had for them in HNK1. And seeing him defeat his corrupted, stronger master for succession could have made a good story, but it's fumbled by just how much fat was in it. And what would we have really missed? Some sick Rima Frida lore? But who cares? Back to main complaints. Third is, I guess I have to solely base this off of Jaggy Gaiden now. The thing with Gaidens is, given that they're prequels, it gives you a solid chance to explain why certain characters acted certain ways when we get to the main story, which I do think is pretty cool, but Ray Gaiden doesn't really do that. You'd think after working with all these female characters, Ray wouldn't be so damn creepy at the start of HNK1. You'd probably also think he'd be way stronger than he was in the main story if you just read this Gaiden, since it's apparently placed before Ken even kills Shin, but no. If anything, he feels somehow weaker in the show than he does here. There's no takeaways to his character because other than the cross-dressing thing he does one time in the show, it feels like across this whole journey, he hardly changes, making it feel somewhat pointless. I remember before I mentioned in the Garu Gaiden video that out of the 3 Gaidens I've read, those being Ray, Garuda, and Jaggy Gaiden, that both Ray and Jaggy Gaiden were 5s while I gave Garuda Gaiden a 4. That was wrong, and I'm happy a certain person argued with me so I had time to think about how I feel about these 2 books, as they thought Garuda Gaiden was better. I think both Ray and Garuda Gaiden are bad for different reasons. I can understand why people hate Ray Gaiden. As I said, the grapey undertones time and time again can turn people off instantly, but trying to not have that be the whole reason I hate it, even other than everything else I said, this book is just boring. Garu Gaiden just felt like they wanted an OC to be cool. It had a lot of tropes and stuff in it, and the main character was just shafting the opposition. It was annoying just because of the stuff I know about HNK, and knowing that things shouldn't have been going the way they were in that book. But it was at least short and to the point. To specify, I'm not saying Garuda Gaiden's a 5 or above, but if someone had to sit here and pick apart this whole Ray Gaiden book, edit the script, and make a video on both of these, I would give Garuda Gaiden a 4, and then give Ray Gaiden a 3. In my opinion, this book is not good at all. It could have been very good. There's a bunch of original characters and places to see, but it just wasn't handled well at all. There's another Gaiden story with a bunch of OCs that's great, and this isn't it. They fumbled way too much story for me to say it's good. I would never reread this manga. Not even for a haha it's bad or a funny panel or 2. I don't find it worth the time and effort of reading. I can somewhat understand why people like it as they latch onto those good nuggets about it, but I don't personally think they justify the whole experience. This video had a very upsetting history to it behind the scenes, which I feel I've probably brought up before. If you guys remember, around this time period, I had uploaded the LP Ken video. The Ray Gaiden video was one of my longer videos, especially for the time, and I know it may not look like it because of my amazing upload frequency, but I was way less efficient back then, so everything took me way longer to crunch out. Let alone for some ungodly reason, I pretty much reviewed it page by page, barely skimming over anything.
meaning I had to read it and practically snapshot every single panel because I thought I needed it. So after scripting, getting all the photos, getting a better and smoother background scroll for my video, which I believed I had shown off a little bit before this, I began editing. And once I reached the scene where Rima gets stabbed by Rufu, my computer broke down. So I lost literally everything when I was halfway done the video. And to say not having my computer after coming pretty far YouTube-wise didn't affect me would be a lie. I was in a pretty bad funk for that time period. Then when I eventually got another computer, I pretty much forgot everything about this story, meaning I had to read arguably the worst Gaiden for a second time, and gather all those pictures, assets, and rewrite the script for it again. And doing all that after knowing the thing was practically done before, to say I was a bit bitter doesn't even begin to explain my feelings for it. As for the video itself, the background scroll was a bit rough, but in the time frame I had to do it, it was the best I could do. As for what I was saying, I still agree with pretty much everything I said except the rating. I was still in my nice timid little guy phase back then, so I rated it very generously. I should have given it a 3 or a 2 or something. It has the length of Toki Gaiden, but was made with the prowess of an AO3 AI fanfiction. It's objectively the worst Gaiden for me story-wise.
Now, I've said before in my other videos, Ryukin is probably one of the most interesting underutilized characters in my opinion. So I really hope that this Gaiden's gonna maybe go over his past, maybe his relationship with Kazumi and Juke, or maybe even who Ryukin's master was. I think this has great potential, especially since it's drawn by the same artist that did Jaggy Gaiden. Since those two are gonna be linked in my mind due to art style, I don't think this one's gonna disappoint me. So without further ado, let's get into the review and recap of Ryukin Gaiden. Our story starts off before the bombs drop, with Ryukin feeling that they're at the end of the century, and he has to make a decision on the successor soon, which also comes with the only time Jaggy's actually represented in one of these pictures with all the Hokuto brothers. We then cut to the scene in the anime where Ken hits Jaggy's pressure points while they're training, and then we cut to them having dinner and a Bible reference? Not sure why it's here, but this will be the last time we see the Hokuto brothers are together. We then see Ken and Yuria talking happily, and Jaggy gets mad at this and attempts to run them over. Jaggy seemingly has a track record for escalating things for no reason. We then cut again, this book cutscenes a lot, to Souther appearing, looking like an absolute goblin at that, at the Hokuto temple and mocking Rao, trying to taunt him into a match. Ryukin shouts at the two of them before they start fighting and tells them to stop and it's against inter-school rules to fight. Jaggy tries to defend his brother, but Ryukin snaps at all of them, asking if they even understand their principles. As Jaggy keeps trying to keep pushing Ryukin basically calls Jaggy a bootlicker and says he'll never pass Hokuto on to him, while Ken and Toki watch on without saying a word. We then get a quick glimpse into the future of Jaggy renouncing Hokuto and saying all that matters is winning. I like this small scene. It shows the problems Ryukin would have passing succession onto either Rao or Jaggy. Rao because of his headstrong, dominant nature, and Jaggy because he's a spineless coward, with the two people worthy of succession staying away from the issue entirely. Wish this was expanded upon a bit more in this Gaiden, but we'll get to that a bit later. We then cut again to Rao, who is absolutely ripped out by the way, confronting Ryukin. From here, it's pretty much Rao and Ryukin's final fight, along with Toki saving Ken and Yuria from the bombs. There is one unique scene that they added with the chariots going into action right after they see the bombs drop. The only other unique thing worth pointing out is in the final panels, where Ryukin says he's made the right choice in successor, but Kenshiro might need Rao's help to unlock his potential. Rao responds with respect for his father and says he'll gladly challenge Ken when the time arrives. In the final panel of this chapter is Ryukin happy Rao called him father, and he says he has no regrets. On to the next chapter, Yes, somehow, Ryukin, the previous successor, only gets a one-shot story, where other than some nice art, nothing is really added to the character. Well, instead of ending the video here, what about we talk about how wasted Ryukin is as a character in general, and I promise at the end I'll make both of these points go together. Ryukin, along with pretty much every other HNK master kind of character, was horribly underutilized. You would think for being the 63rd successor of Hokuto, they would have given him a bit more screen time, but unfortunately, he gets smothered out nigh instantly. Rao causing his death before the events of the show is unfortunate, but I can accept that. He's an old man after all, and it did make for a good twist when you didn't know what happened to him. The problem is, even when they decided to bring him up in flashbacks, he hardly gets to do anything in them. Old Ryukin's flashbacks pretty much just make him the generic anime teacher type character. So he's basically a blank slate in the personality department. But in the flashbacks of young Ryukin, he seemed interesting, to the point where he threw his two students, which were both children, off of a cliff because he deemed them unworthy, until Rao managed to scale the cliff alone. Or when Fudo raids the temple, and other than overreacting with immediate violence, he doesn't even really seem to care. Or when he didn't want to train Toki until he half beat a man to death. He seems set on getting results, with it taking extremes to change his mind, and everything else just seems secondary. But somehow, maybe even accidentally, in earlier events shown before he was a teacher, he seemed to be a caring person, as evident in his flashbacks where he didn't want to fight Koryu or when he stopped Juke and showed him remorse. This character has all the potential to make for an interesting story, as even the small glimpses shown promise, since his entire younger life is a mystery to us, making it the perfect opportunity for people to tell us about him. But unfortunately, somehow Ryuken Gaiden is probably going to be the only spin-off book we get about him. It's pretty tragic that a book like Ray Gaiden could be made with 50 chapters, but a book about Ryuken, the in my opinion more interesting in concept character, only gets a single chapter. What's more insulting is they brought the artist from Jaggy Gaiden back, which probably has the best portrayal of Ryuken being an actual character. All this for them to do nothing of note with him or even bring up Jaggy Gaiden's events.
Ryuken Gaiden isn't technically a main Gaiden, but since I already reviewed it, might as well throw it in here. Ryuken Gaiden disappointed me mainly because the concept of giving Ryuken his own standalone story is so good. And when I saw the Jaggy Gaiden art style, all the neurons in my head were going off. But then it was relegated to a one-chapter special stuck in the middle of Ichigo Aiji. The only reason I even stumbled across it was because it was in the Gaiden list. I don't have much else to add to this because I covered a lot of this in the video, but it hurt that this only got one chapter while something like Hokuto Didi gets however many chapters in 2 seasons of an anime.
And today I'm going to be covering Juza Gaiden. I was recommended to cover this book multiple times by a certain person with a dog icon on Discord, and in some free time I had, I cracked and I read the whole thing. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I do feel I have a bit to say about this book, but luckily it's not to the same extent as the 2 other horrible Gaidens that shall not be named here. But let's get into our review and recap of Juza Gaiden. So our story starts off with some rebels fighting against Keno's army. Things aren't going well, so one of their members runs off to find Juza. He manages to track him down, and So after Juza cools down a bit, Yan, the member who was sent to get Juza, manages to convince Juza to come help fight off Keno's army. Everybody pauses as Juza makes his very casual entrance onto the battlefield, but as they're talking, the commander of Keno's forces arrives. Someone said to rival the Man of 7 Scars, which almost immediately makes Juza want to fight him. As expected, Juza makes quick work of this commander and says he isn't in the same league as Ken before killing him along with all of his men with little effort. Then Juza gets swarmed by women and the rebels celebrate. Where did the women come from? I have no idea, with his biggest fanboy Yan showing his admiration for his hero Juza. I believe that the start of this Gaiden is a little slow, and a bit lacking as we'll get to in a bit. One thing is, Juza's acting exactly the way you'd expect him to act. Even as early as now in the 100 or so words I've told you so far, everything Juza's doing fits his character. This is already better than a certain book called Ray Gaiden where things just happen and there wasn't anything special the MC himself was adding to the story. This is a trend that you'll see throughout this story and I really appreciate it, but let's continue. Night falls and as the rebels are planning a raid, they get info that the Man of 7 Scars has toppled Cassandra. They're hesitant to call Juza about this, seeming to know that Juza will immediately go after Ken if he finds out, so they try to keep it a secret till after their raid's over. Yan hears about this and sneaks out to tell Juza. And after a brief talk about freedom and how Juza's one with the clouds, Yan tells him about Cassandra, which leads to Juza heading after Ken and unable to help the rebels with their raid. When the day comes, they all seem scared until Yan spills the beans that he told Juza and that they had no right to deprive him of his freedom. They take this about as well as you'd expect, but as they're stomping Yan out, they remember that they still have to deal with Keno's forces. People begin bowing out left and right before Yan decides to go off on his own to deal with them. His courage seems to inspire all the remainders to go with him, but when they arrive, they find out Juza apparently dealt with all of the army by himself before leaving. Yan gives a little inspired speech, and then he doesn't show up for the rest of the book. No, I'm not kidding. None of these characters will ever show up again. This is one of the weakest aspects of this book. The original story sections are carried by Juza, as the rest of the characters are pretty much useless plywood. They lack any characters, they don't really have much time to be expanded upon other than one character point, and they don't really get anything afterwards. This doesn't ruin the book, but it's very noticeable for these first 2 little arcs. Anyways, we cut to Juza thinking about hunting down Ken as he couldn't protect Juza's beloved, before we cut to him waking up with some woman and them just casually talking. Which turns into Juza spilling the tea on Kenshiro before he casually ends up heading out to Cassandra. Then he immediately gets attacked by a bear and falls off of the cliff. No, I didn't skip anything. This just happens. We then cut to a flashback of child Yuria telling Juza that she'd love to have a ring before Juza finds a nest full of jewels and grabs a ring to take to Yuri. The same ring we can assume he was catching as he fell. It then cuts to him upset about his father not telling him and Yuria were half-siblings, before we then cut back to the present where Juza has regained consciousness but is blinded, and the bear or some other bear is at the bottom of the ravine with him. After a bit of running, Juza seems to snap and turns to face the bear, but as he looks he sees the bear has 7 scars and this sends Juza into a fit of rage. He then brutalizes the bear before simply noticing it was protecting this area its significant other died at. After apologizing and passing out, Juza wakes up in a bed next to a woman that says she'll address his wounds and give him a tour around the village she's in. As she's showing him around, she mentions that he must think of all of them as caged birds, and as they're talking, they walk past a group of villagers being rowdy and planning to sell off one of their own. As a quick note, this is Jan, or Yan, and this is Alyssa. Jot these down because these will become very important later, or at least one of them will. So as you can assume, Juza doesn't really like this too much, so he intervenes, which prompts Keno's forces to intervene, which prompts Juza to have another flashback of him talking to Rao with a very long chin on their head about Rao's ambition. Rao takes advantage of this point and asks Juza why he doesn't just take Yuria for himself, which seems to aggravate Juza into dropping a zinger of a line. Rao gets angry and prepares to fight Juza, but before Rao can do anything, Juza disappears. They both talk about their admiration for each other before we cut back to the present with Juza killing Keno's forces. He yells for Jan to escape, and as he is, the woman from earlier offers to help. Surprise, she's evil! And a dude, even worse! But anyways, Yona here ends up telling Juza that they have a plan to destroy the hope of the village by having Juza get killed in an arena they have under the city. He then makes Jan stab Juza and Juza passes out. You might wonder why I said makes in quote-unquotes. Well, that's because there's not really anything here to stop him from not stabbing Juza. He could have literally just ran into the forest from here and Juza most definitely would have backed this play. None of Keno's forces have guns or anything to stop him from doing this, but instead of doing this very obvious tactic, or Juza saying anything, he wants to be cool, so he tells the kid to stab him. A little stupid, but let's keep going. This cuts to Salder and Juza having a convo. That doesn't matter so much, I'm just gonna skip it. And then we cut to Juza tied up on the floor, with Yona giving another hope speech before we then look at Jan and girl, I forgot the name of, fighting. For some reason, Jan's just turned into a murder monster Rima and is actually just trying to straight kill her. This character shift is so abrupt, I really thought he was a double agent or they secretly drugged him for something. But no, for some reason all of his humanity just went out the window and he's on kill mode. We then cut to Yona's backstory where basically his father sold him as a slave, and when they finally met in this arena, his dad killed himself. Yona joined Rao's army and he hears about Juza and he wants to meet him as he believes he can change something. I don't know how in Rao's army Yona wouldn't have heard more about Kenshiro instead of Juza, since as we've seen, Juza really hasn't been doing too much other than smashing girls and occasionally helping rebels. But let's continue. Jan corners girl as Juza's distracted fighting and slashes her, but then finally comes to his senses and stabs himself just as Juza makes it to them. Juza then exchanges some words with this idiot and then he dies, with Juza alpha mailing past Yona and preparing to bury Jan. You may be wondering why I'm calling Jan stupid. Well, if he didn't immediately turn into a Terminator the second he stepped in this arena, no one would have gotten hurt. If he stopped for even a little bit at the start and cried or showed any human emotion, Juza would have reached them in time. If this was some random person or one of Keno's forces, maybe I'd accept him going knife crazy, but him going gamer mode against the only character we can assume he has ties with just doesn't make any sense to me. But the little plot device served its purpose, I guess. After finishing burying Jan, Yona appears and the girl tries to stab him. Juza blocks the stab with his hands, and then we cut to a flashback of Jaggy bullying Yuria and Juza beating the dog shit out of him before Yuria stopped him. As Yuria's about to explain why she stopped him, Jaggy pulls out a knife and prepares to stab Juza? I don't know, guys, I think this escalated a little bit. Juza stops the stab and prepares to presumably kill Jaggy, but then Yuria takes the slash to her hand to protect him. That being said, Jaggy should have got his ass beat for this. We cut to the present where Juza breaks the knife and punches Yona to the ground. Yona asks Juza to kill him and Juza says no and walks away. The girl then appears and Yona asks her the same thing. Dudes do anything but go to therapy, honestly. But the girl says she won't let him die until she can forgive him. Did you enjoy that story? I hope you did, because it's being packed up and sent to the middle of nowhere, just like the first part, because it literally didn't matter, because we're never going to talk about this ever again. To be fair, I think it gets better past this point, but neither of these parts do anything but just let Juza be cool. I wouldn't blame anybody for dropping this book before seeing the better parts, because these first 2 mini arcs are not really that great. As I said earlier, Juza's heavy carrying the story so far. You got 2 interesting flashbacks, and you know Juza doesn't really like Ken, again, and that's about it so far. It's cute, but if the rest of the book was like this, I'd give it a 4. Luckily, it's not, but this opener is really bland. I'd be surprised if a lot of people made it past this point if they weren't already a Juza fan. Then back onto the story, we cut to Juza kicking down a door as he hears a kid screaming for help. She wants help since her brother apparently hasn't said a word since yesterday, but when surrounded by Juza's Chad energy, she manages to squeak out a sis, and Juza smiles knowing he's about to kill both of these kids. Just kidding, that doesn't happen, but like, seriously, why is he smirking like this? After helping them, Juza walks outside to find Huey and Kakyo in. They apparently arrived to make Juza come back to the Nanto General's tower, but he gives the same reasoning he gave in Garuda Gaiden, which is basically he doesn't care what happens to Nanto and Hokuto, and he doesn't want to serve a general he doesn't even know the face of. Huey and Sharon can't accept this answer, so the two of them team up to unleash a blast to knock out Juza. I can't wait to see This is just a fucking joke at this point. So Juza kicks his legs in a circle so fast the blast disappears and they all smirk about it, noting how far they've all come since the last time they saw each other. We then cut to the baby chariots. Oh, look at them, Subfudo. Look at them eating their little sandwiches. But after a bit, Juza states he wants to live free and attempts to run away. He doesn't get too far and he ends up eating something he shouldn't have and he passes out. He comes back to in the training grounds with Yuria watching over him. This is the first time they meet as a quick note. Yuria tries to get Juza to eat but he refuses. Yuria then says she won't eat either. Apparently these two little beans don't eat for an entire 5 days until Yuria passes out and Juza gets worried. She says she still won't eat until Juza eats, so he finally gives in and they both eat and laugh together. It's little scenes like this that made me love this book. We didn't get to know too much about why Juza liked Yuria in the base story, but these little scenes help you understand his actions more and more. From just the scene alone, you can see why Juza would love Yuria. And we get more of these to help cement, with each seeming to get better and better at selling this point. It's a main highlight of this book by a long shot. I love all of these scenes. We cut to the present where he tells the both of them the only person he'd give his life to is Yuria, and then he prepares to leave. The two of them watch as Juza is leaving, but then as he is, a body magically appears in front of him. I have no idea where this body came from. And it's evident that Ryuga caused these scars, or big scar. Juza's surprised, but Shuren tells him Ryuga changed after Juza left. We then cut to Juza after finding out Yuria is his half-sister, tearing up Nanto statues before eventually being detained, stating that if he can't have Yuria, he doesn't care about anything else. As he's sulking, Ryuga appears to bust him out. He basically says the clouds deserve to be free and he covers Juza as he makes his escape. We then cut back to the present where Ryuga arrives and begins killing Huey and Shuren's troops. The two try to intervene and Ryuga immediately, no joke, in one panel beats the both of them. Ryuga turns his attention towards Juza and they begin fighting. After some nice panels, the two come to a draw and then talk for a while before Ryuga heads off. Juza ends up doing the same thing and we cut to him wandering into a village where he's attacked by a female-esque figure fighting with yo-yos. I wonder who it could possibly be. So after he dodges some yo-yos and catches a charge, Mamaya manages to pin Juza to the ground. As she's telling him she doesn't tolerate bandits, Ari runs up and Juza accidentally knocks Mamaya off of him. So the two talk. Juza asks where Rei is and they both tell him that Rei passed away defending Mamaya. After leaving a flower at Rei's grave, he asks where Ken went, with Mamaya saying that he left to go save the world. Juza starts to roast Ken, but Mamaya immediately slaps him, which leads to her running away, and Ari says that Mamaya's been through a lot, so she might have taken that sentiment personally. We then get a flashback to Juza and Rei having a friendly sparring match. After they come to a draw, Rei talks about how after he masters his technique, he'll figure out what else to do with his life, while Juza seems unsure of what he wants to do. We then cut back to the present where Juza seems like he still doesn't know what he wants. Around this point, we end up going back into the main story's continuity, as we see Rihaku's men trying to ask Juza to join them. We then cut to another flashback. I know it's Whiplash since we just got one, but stay with me. Where Ken's walking around and Juza seems aggravated that he doesn't care about Yuria, as he apparently fell out of a tree and has a fever right now. Yuria arrives telling Juza to stop, and it's revealed that Ken was protecting some baby birds for Yuria all night. She then asks if Ken's okay, and Juza notes that he's never seen her so concerned before. We then cut back to the present where Juza laments his failures and is getting aggravated that the guards keep trying to make him go back. This leads into the scene where he's captured and Yuria comes to tell him that she's the Nanto general. As she's asking him to give his life for her with tears in her eyes, we get a quick little scene of when they first met in a previous flashback before we get to see them hug. I like this scene more than the original stories because before it just felt like, Yuri's here, I guess I'll just die. But it really feels like this has more emotion to it. not even just due to the flashback or the build-up to this scene, but this entire scene by itself just packs a lot more punch for me. Yuria seems more affected than she did in the original story, because if I remember right, she cried for like 2 seconds with one little tear coming out of her eye and the story kept going. Here she seems genuinely upset she has to ask her friend to die for her. It's just a nice touch. Rihaku and Juza have small talk about Juza's fate and him basically having to give up his life so the person he loves can be with Ken. And we actually get to see Rihaku have some humanity and cry as he really doesn't want Juza to die. This is more than the original story did for him, as Rihaku only really seemed to care about Yuria. It's a small but charming scene. As I'm sure we all know by now, after this we get the Rao v Juza fight. There's some nice roasting here Juza gets in this scene, but things end up going the same. As Juza's on the ground, we get one last flashback, which is my favorite flashback of this entire book. Juza prepares to run away again and Yuria finds him. They have a quick conversation about why he's leaving, with Juza basically saying he's a cloud, and clouds serve no other purpose than drifting aimlessly through the air. To which Yuria responds by saying that the clouds give shade when it's hot and rains in droughts, and they give people a feeling that they can go anywhere they want. She ends with saying that he might not think it, but he helps people just by being there and everyone knows he's important. This entire scene hit me. I can't fully explain why, but this scene just really did it for me and sold why Juza really loved Yuria. Across this entire book, it felt like Yuria was really the only one there for him and that he really bonded with, and this final speech just cemented it for me. After this scene, as you can imagine, the conclusion of the Juza and Rao fight happens, with Juza passing on and Rao expressing his respect for his opponent. The last few panels are everyone feeling that Juza's passed away and Yuria crying over his death, with our final panel being Yuria and Juza as teenagers running around in a grassy field having fun. The end. Now, let's wrap this up. What do I think about this Gaiden? Well, it has strengths and weaknesses, both being very prominent. For its strengths, it's mainly its character-defining traits it gives to Juza. Giving more of an explanation and showing scenes of him and Yuria together really strengthened their relationship, which in the base story, we really didn't get anything other than Juza's words. Juza's apparent hatred of Ken is a real nice touch. It's something that wasn't really implied in the base canon, but it would make sense for him to hate the guy that Yuria ended up with. Even the jabs he makes at Ken as he says he let her die are very believable. I do like the fact that they made him interact with other characters we never got to see him interact with, like Ryuga Souther and some early Rao reactions. It made him feel a bit more connected to the story. My only real complaint is, honestly, I wish we got to see him interact more with Ken. This isn't a problem with the book itself, I just think it would have been a real interesting dynamic if these two teamed up or if Juza attacked Ken, and I feel like it was a real missed opportunity as they do briefly touch on it. The entire end half of this book, past their Yuga section along with the young Juza and Yuria flashbacks, were peak Gaiden writing. My belief is if you're writing a prequel type story for one of these characters, you have to let me walk away with more knowledge for these characters and why they acted a certain way. I also want to know how they would have reacted to other canon characters or their thoughts on them. Make me really understand who the author was writing about, and for the end half of this book, it accomplishes that. I walked away with way more Juza knowledge than I started with. Way better than some other stupid Gaiden about Rei where his character hardly changes, although the book is 8 times the size of this one. As for the weaker aspects of Juza Gaiden though, the entire first 2 non-canon sections where Juza's just dealing with the rebels in Jan, you really don't care about those characters at all and they don't give you a reason to. Juza was the only well-written character in those scenes, so everything else was just kinda boring. I'm not gonna lie to you, I debated dropping this book after the Yona section because I was just so bored of it. It just felt like generic anime film. As I said earlier, I wouldn't blame you for putting down this book at that point because of how bland it is. It's not bad, there's no angry trigger like Garuda magically finding a map that leads to the Nanto General's tower. It's just nothing of substance at all. I kinda wish the writer focused more on the dynamic of Juza disliking Ken and having him interact with some more of the canon characters. Or maybe just having one of them change his mind about Ken, because honestly, that's what I thought the Mamaya and Ari scene was going to be, but it was straight glossed over because Ari goes, yeah, Rei died, and then we get flashback out of the town immediately. Heavily missed opportunity. Now, where would I rank it? In comparison to all of the other Gaidens I've read, maybe a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10? Understand me, when I say something's a 5, I mean it's average. Nothing really wrong with it or that it's bad, just it's not gonna leave a lasting impression on me. As I said earlier, this Gaiden definitely has moments where it shines, and is probably some of my favorite character-driven interactions in the series. But then you have the other half where it's Jan, Yona and Girl. If the entire first half of the book wasn't this way and was written with more interactions I would have cared about, I could probably see this being a 10 out of 10, honestly. But that's not the world we live in. And I don't feel comfortable giving this over a 6 or 7 since I legit almost put the book down at the start, so I feel a 6.5 is fine for this. I'd recommend Juza fans give it a look, as I doubt the slow start would bother them as much, but for a normal HNK fan that feels no affinity towards this character, if you can slog through the start, I promise it's a worthy read. I guess that's really all I had to say.
There's not a ton I need to say about this video. The background scroll was pretty crusty still for some reason, but I still pretty much agree with everything I said here. One fun behind the scenes fact is that this was actually a re-upload. When it first premiered, it had one specific edit that I fumbled so bad by accident I felt I needed to re-upload. So I did, which meant I lost a couple of views on it, but eh.
And today we're going to talk about my favorite Gaiden, Jaggy Gaiden. The main reason I say it was, is before I started this channel, the only 2 Gaidens I actually read was Jaggy Gaiden and Ray Gaiden. I'm sure you can imagine why this one was my favorite out of the 2. As I stated in a previous video, I actually didn't want to make this review, mainly because I didn't want to shatter my mental image of this being a super impactful story that helps explain a lot of Jaggy's loose ends, and why he ended up the way he was in the main story. But today we're gonna change that. So, without wasting too much time, let's get into our review and recap of Jaggy Gaiden. Our story starts off with Jaggy doing Jaggy things like terrorizing villagers and Ken wanting to come after him. Simple stuff we see in the base canon. The main reason I'm pointing this out is because there's one thing really different about this book that I want to talk about as soon as I can. The art style. You may have noticed in other Gaidens I never really talked about art style because usually I personally don't mind it, but Jaggy Gaiden's art style is very different. To the point where I can see it turning off a lot of people. It's very abstract looking, with a lot of characters looking very long or ugly or strange, for lack of better words. I think the ugliness and grit fits Jaggy's personality as a whole, but I can understand why a lot of people dislike it. But back to the story, we cut to a young Jaggy talking to Ryukin. In short, Jaggy's being picked on because he's an orphan, and Ryukin says it's up to Jaggy to establish his own value. And even though they're not blood related, their father-son relationship is stronger than any other. Jaggy then goes back to the people who were bullying him and beats them up for talking about his father. Afterwards, we see Jaggy come home to be introduced to his new brothers, and is told that Ryukin will be devoting his life to training these 2 in Hokuto Shinken. Something Ryukin apparently never told Jaggy of. One day while watching Rao train, he seems to get fed up with the entire situation and runs away, with Rao stating that Jaggy's a pathetic younger brother. As Ryukin worries about Jaggy, we cut to a flashback of him saving an infant Jaggy from a burning building. After being told both of Jaggy's parents died in the fire, Ryukin says that he won't leave this baby alone in the world and adopts him. Jaggy's on the run and finds a dog he wants to take to be a loner with him. A biker almost hits the dog, but Jaggy blocks the hit for him. As you can assume, the biker didn't like this too much, so after some words, the 2 start scuffling. The boss of the gang, along with his little sister Anna, seem to like his fighting spirit and ask Jaggy to join. Jaggy's obviously confused by this, but after a quick talk about destiny, he joins the biker gang. After Ryukin states that Jaggy's been gone for 6 months, he arrives at the foot of the temple asking Ryukin to train him as a successor of Hokuto as well. Ryukin ignores him, but Jaggy follows him in anyways. Seems to be failing their basic training on this tree, with Rao taunting him how Toki's also training to become the successor. Jaggy feels defeated but says after watching Ryukin for so long he can't fail in becoming the next successor. As he struggles, Ryukin introduces Kenshiro to both Toki and Rao. Jaggy reacts violently to seeing such a young kid being acknowledged after his father just rejected him. I love this. I love how they set up for Jaggy to dislike Kenshiro before anything's even happened between them, with his own father rejecting to teach him Hokuto, but as a cruel coincidence where you can accept someone far younger than him not soon after rejecting him. I don't have too much else to say about this first chapter other than it's a strong one. After this, Jaggy attacks Ken out of jealousy. After Ryukin shouts at him, he snaps out of his rage and Ryukin leaves the both of them. Jaggy chases after Ryukin, asking why he won't teach him Hokuto, but Ryukin simply responds saying he'll always be his son, but he'll never become his student. Jaggy begins trying to continue his practice against the tree, but Rao mocks him, which enrages Jaggy so much he punches the tree in half. Rao continues taunting him, but Ken tries to intervene, to which Jaggy immediately knocks Ken down. Afterwards, Jaggy's moping around in his own weakness in the dojo, but a man comes in asking where the candidates for Hokuto's succession are. After the man insults Ryukin, Jaggy says that he's the successor and Ryukin's son to bait the man into attacking him. The man seems to get aggravated by this and beats Jaggy down before asking him where the real successor is. As Jaggy's about to pass out, his father's words go through his mind, and he hits the man with an unnamed Hokuto technique. After saying he'll become stronger, it cuts to later with Ryukin finding Jaggy in the dojo pummeling the man, saying that he must repay his father. Ryukin catches his fist, and as he does, Jaggy passes out after a few words are exchanged. When Jaggy wakes up, Ryukin tells him from this day forwards, he will become his pupil. We cut to a bit later where Jaggy and Ken seem to be training. It seems evident that even this far back, Ken's skills are far beyond Jaggy's. This leads to Jaggy snapping, and instead of hitting his training pressure points, Jaggy grabs Ken's throat and threatens him. Ryukin breaks up the two and seems disappointed in Jaggy. The cool thing about this scene is while Ken's trying to simply land a punch to complete his training, it's an extreme contrast to Jaggy, who seems like he'd rather just beat down Kenshiro through any brutal means necessary. After all this, Jaggy still seems mad that Ken's better than him, and he runs back into Anna, which seems to make his day for lack of a better word. She takes him back to the boss and they all have a happy reunion. Jaggy seemingly about to confess to Anna, they're raided by an enemy gang. They say they arrived to send a message of fear, and just as quickly as they arrived, they leave. With Jaggy and the gang's boss noticing that Jaggy seemed to have gotten cold feet and froze up in the moment of them all attacking. We then cut back to Jaggy's training where Rao seems to be effortlessly beating him. After getting knocked down, Ryukin asks Jaggy if he even wants to continue learning Hokuto. Jaggy says that he can't ever give up, and Ryukin teaches him his iconic R-Hat strike. Afterwards, he leaves the dojo on his bike to head towards the gang's base, seemingly frustrated at how weak he is. When he arrives, he finds out that the enemy gang that attacked before attacked again while the boss and the others were away, and they took Anna. Jaggy and one of the gang mates head right outside the enemy gang's base, and Jaggy immediately storms in, seeing them pleasure themselves with Anna. In a fit of rage, he beats all the gang down easily and saves her, saying that it's gonna be okay and he's become stronger than he even realized. We're then taken to the next day where Yuria pleads with Jaggy to go see Ken as he's at the inter-school match. For those of you who don't have the entire show memorized, it's when Shu gave his eyes to spare a young Kenshiro in his match. There isn't really too much to talk about in the match since it's about the same as the show, except for them mentioning that Rao forced Ken to fight. Jaggy seems a bit annoyed that they took Ken instead of him, but no one really seems to pay him much attention. Togi then has a small talk with Yuria about how important Ken's going to be, as he saw the potential in him. The next day, we see Anna sneaking up to the Hokuto temple to give Jaggy a gift. We then shift to Jaggy, who wakes up and begins beating Ken. Still mad that he wasn't chosen to represent Hokuto, but Ken was. The brothers take Jaggy away from Ken and Rao begins berating him, with Anna hiding behind this pillar, seemingly getting upset for the way that they were talking about Jaggy. After they leave, Anna appears in front of the distraught Jaggy and gives him a speech, and after hearing her and thinking back on how he wants to impress Ryukin, he seems to bounce back pretty fast. You may have noticed I haven't interjected in a while. Really because there's not too much to say right now. The one thing about Jaggy Gaiden is there are a few slow character building moments, and these chapters are those. Not that these are bad or anything or a complete crawl like a certain other Gaiden. There's a few good character interactions here and there, but there isn't really too much new I can say since I already mentioned I like Rao's characterization, and I like Ryukin and Jaggy's relationship in this book. If I had to point out two things though, I do like the fact that Ryukin secretly was the one who taught Jaggy R-Hat strike, and I really do like Anna's characterization. Not that she's some amazing, outstanding character, but she's the only Gaiden side character who passes as an actual character. I get why Jaggy likes her, as she found him at a low point, and I get why she's somewhat interested in him, as it's actually explained in the book. This is already better than every other Gaiden I've reviewed on this channel, since in literally all the other Gaidens, the OC characters were meant to be pre-established and they kinda left us with a little description prompt being their only personality trait, but I don't want to get too deep into anything yet, as from what I remember, I'm going to have a lot to say soon. Back to the story, Jaggy heads back to the gang's base and talks to Anna, who after everything she went through when the other gang captured her, seems to be on the outside at least holding herself together. Jaggy notices this and composes himself before the two have a little conversation about dreams in the future. The two then walk to a field in the middle of nowhere and continue their conversation, and Anna asks if Jaggy has a special place. He points up to the stars of Hokuto and Anna laughs when he says those stars are his dream, but then says he can make his dreams come true and he can do it. We then get this cute art panel at the bottom, which right under that is contrasted by an adult Jaggy with skulls behind him, instead of the flowers that we saw before, seemingly representing the man we know he's bound to turn into. I love this. I don't even remember seeing this on my first time reading it, but it's a great reminder that this optimistic kid who wants to impress his father turns into this horrific monster that we see in the base canon of the show. On the next panel, we see Anna said that she couldn't give her present to Jaggy, but says she loves him and she wants them to walk towards their dreams together. We then cut to Jaggy, who's just defeated Kenshiro and he's gloating about his victory. Jaggy says that he should be named the successor, and Rao joins in telling Ryukin Jaggy's right and it's about time that he decides the successor. They all continue talking and walk away. Ken lies on the ground seemingly contemplating, contemplating something. But as he is, Anna appears, slapping him and calling him a coward, asking if he can get away with playing around like that. She goes on to say Ken's not helping Jaggy by holding back on him. And after their small talk, Ken says that he'll fight at full force the next time they spar. We then cut to the next training session where Jaggy's shocked by how well his brother is doing. Ryukin interrupts their fight and notices that Ken doesn't have an ounce of hesitation in his fighting. After the usual of Rao blowing him off, Jaggy runs away again. But this time we're told he disappears for 5 years. Anna seems annoyed and Ryukin seems worried. But when we see Ken training, Jaggy appears again. Seemingly stronger and a bit more confident, he challenges Ken and immediately knocks him down. Ryukin notices Jaggy spits darts at Ken and reprimands Jaggy, saying he's become so obsessed with winning that he's resorted to this, which angers Jaggy, sending him on a mad tirade about how he wants to abandon Hokuto and how Ryukin damned him to live a life of humiliation. While Jaggy's out brooding, the first bomb drops. Anna thinks it's a star, and since it's next to Jaggy, it must be hers, and she wishes upon it as it hits the earth. This will symbolize quite a few things moving forwards, but let's keep going. Jaggy takes the explosion point blank, and when he looks around, he sees he's the only person left standing nearby. He wanders around until he notices a group of people fighting for scraps of food, calling them pathetic and asking what's become of them. He then notices that the world's basically been reset, and he'll finally have the chance to be somebody. But almost as soon as that joy comes, he worries as he remembers Anna and is almost immediately concerned for her. Jaggy takes his motorcycle and rides down to their old base, but when he arrives, all that's left is a badly injured boss, who says that the enemy gang from before raided them and in all the chaos took Anna. Jaggy immediately takes off after her as the enemy gang prepares to grape her. As she pleads for a hero, we see Jaggy on his way to save her. Anna manages to free herself after knocking out one of the goons, but the entire gang sets out after her. Jaggy's still searching for her Panic but can't find her. While Jaggy's still looking for her, they catch her again and all the gang proceed to take part with her. We then cut to Anna later at the Hokuto Temple stairs. She begins climbing and crying how she wants to see Jaggy again. When she reaches the middle of the stairs, she sees a figure and passes out. We find out that this figure was Ken, not Jaggy. Ken goes to help her, but when he reaches, she's already dead. Jaggy finds the two and immediately swats Ken away, asking Anna to stop joking and get up. After noticing she's not going to get up, he brings the dead Anna to the group of gang members with tears in his eyes and asks which one of them did this. This scene is probably what most people think back to on this book because of how powerful this entire section was. This story is how grape is meant to be handled in the story. Unlike Gaiden, which mentions it over and over again and no one seems affected by it, here it's raw and uncomfortable as it's treated as a horrific thing. No one plays it up for laughs or just as a little event. Even the artist, though I can't show you those scenes for obvious reasons, intentionally made them as uncomfortable as possible. You really want Jaggy to save her. It's traumatic, as such a horrendous thing should be. You really want Jaggy to find her and save her, but it doesn't happen. And as Anna's crawling up the stairs of the temple, it's hard to watch. I don't know how it hit you guys since you're just watching the recap, but this is probably the most emotions a Gaiden's ever made me feel. This entire chapter is just painful to sit through. Not in a bad writing way, but in the way you really don't want to see any of this happen. And when she thinks she saw Jaggy, but she just saw Ken, it's horrible. The last thing she saw was the man Jaggy hated with all of his being. She doesn't get to see her lover in her final moments, and Jaggy discovers her dead body in the arms of his brother Kenshiro. It's powerful writing. Way more powerful than anything the other Gaiden seem capable of. We're nearing the end of the book and I probably shouldn't have even interjected here, but the writing is so good I felt like I needed to. We then cut to the Hokuto Temple, which is under siege by explosions, while Ryukin's shocked by what's happening. He wanders out to see Jaggy's behind the attack, demanding that his master choose him as the successor. Ryukin brings up the day he told Jaggy to call him master and apologizes, noticing that if he had just kept Jaggy as a son instead of a disciple, things never would have gone this far. Ryukin appears to accept Jaggy killing him, but Kenshiro intervenes, beating Jaggy down just like he does in the anime. But when asked why he stopped by Ryukin, Ken says that he could never kill Jaggy, as he's his master's son, to which Ryukin looks hurt. Things go about the same way they do in the anime from here, as we immediately cut to Ken's final encounter with Jaggy. The only thing that changes is that Jaggy seems happy, as while he's dying he seems to envision Anna, and Kenshiro thanks Anna for giving him the strength to put down his brother. After all said and done, we get this final panel of Jaggy's helmet with two flowers representing him and Anna sprouting from it, and that is the end. Now that it's all over, how do I feel about it? I'm sure you noticed, unlike my other videos on Gaidens, I didn't interject any scenes to point out how stupid or boring they were. I just couldn't. Everything in this book felt like there was meaning behind it, and there wasn't a single scene that felt like a straight waste of time. Everything had a purpose, either in conveying character or moving the story forwards. This is what a Gaiden should be. A way to get you to think differently on a character. This story can literally shift the entire way you think about Jaggy. He goes from being a greedy asshole that only cared about himself in the canon, to a tragic villain who lost near everything and the last thing that he cared about was taken from him. On another note, Anna is the best Gaiden character, as I said earlier. She's definitely the best from the books I've covered so far. As I said earlier, she's actually built upon in the story, and we get to see scenes that make you like her. Unlike the entirety of Ray Gaiden, where every side character was bad, or Juza Gaiden, where its original characters were unironically the worst part of the book. Anna is so crucial to this story, it wouldn't work without her, and her death is probably one of the most uncomfortable things I've had to read in a while. Ryukin loving Jaggy as a son and being reluctant to even teach him Hakuto, knowing what it means for his fate, and then seeing their final encounter where it seemed he was ready to die for turning Jaggy into this thing, everything just worked. Every single aspect of this story just clicks. I feel the people who write this off as a sad story just to be sad only remember Anna's death. There's way more that this story adds to Jaggy as a character than just this moment. Let alone the story's based on one of the most insane, unforgivable characters in HNK. There's no way a story about him could have a happy sunshine and rainbows ending. Jaggy Gaiden's a story about a character who just wanted to be loved and appreciated, whose wish then turns into obsession, and after he loses everything, finally insanity. If you read this story by itself, it would be good. It works as its own narrative, but since we, the readers, most likely came from base HNK, we read this story from the start dreading how this boy who loves his father is going to turn into the most foul brother of Hakuto. The ugly, grungy art style encapsulates how ugly of a person Jaggy ends up turning into. Rao's interactions with Jaggy fits his character, and it gives us well-written interactions for two characters we never even really see talk in the main story. I could gush on and on about this book, but maybe I should just give it a rating. Before in another video, I was afraid to review this story because I was afraid I was fanboying and blindly loved it, thinking that when I look back I'd hate it. But that was far from the truth. Jaggy Gaiden's a 10 out of 10 in my eyes. Literally the perfect Gaiden story. Before I said I never thought a Gaiden could get that high, but upon rereading this story, it just did everything right. If you remember my Juza Gaiden review, I said that the flashback scenes were the best part of that book as they gave so much insight on how Juza became the way he was. Jaggy Gaiden's entire story was like those flashbacks. Interesting scenes which build onto a character. If it wasn't obvious, I highly recommend this story. It's the best Gaiden in my eyes, and I'd be shocked if any story came close to taking that title from it for me, but given there's a few more, I'll hold a little hope. But I think that's all I can say about this story unless you want to hear me gush about it more than I already have. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it, and with all that out of the way, I've been M, and I am out.
The sooner the reviews get, the more I'm most likely going to say they're fine in my eyes. And I'm pretty sure this is the best performing Gaiden review that I've ever done. It's the only one I didn't want to put any real jokes into because it struck a lot of emotional chords for me. And I really wanted you guys to feel the emotions I felt when I was reading it. Even if to a lesser extent because it's a review, of course. Jaggy Gaiden is really similar to the Baron arc for me. It touched on some very real topics I really wasn't expecting it to. While I could understand Baron because I literally knew a few people like him in real life, Jaggy Gaiden reflected on a lot of things I've gone through. A lot of Jaggy's interactions with Ryukin and Anna specifically reminded me of some experiences that I've had in my own life. Things I don't feel are normally talked about, especially in anime or manga. Or at least not in a mature way. It's the only 10 out of 10 I think I've ever given, and I 100% understand why. While Juza Gaiden was a good story for his character, Jaggy Gaiden felt like a good story for his character and just in general. I could probably keep going, but let's go to the next review.
Toki Gaiden. Now you may be wondering, why did it take you so long to get to this? Why isn't recap in the title? Because I really don't want to do that. If I really love this story or it pissed me off, pretty much like a certain other two Gaidens did that we won't be naming here, I wouldn't mind doing that. But I don't feel that way about Toki Gaiden at all. For me personally, Toki Gaiden is probably the most boring Gaiden I've read so far. Not bad, not peak HNK, just average. And instead of slogging through a recap where I have to skip chapters and chunks just to find something interesting to say about the entire first portion of this story, I think it'd be better for all of us if I just handled this as a review where I gave my thoughts on it. First thing I want to address, This is the longest Gaiden, locking in at 53 or so chapters. Remember what I said about Gaidens in one of the recaps? I said something along the lines of Gaiden should cap out at around 30 or so chapters. Do you know why I said that? I said that because when authors get all this time, they tend to fill it up with a bunch of shit no one cares about. You won't believe what happened here. The first half of this feels like the first half of Juza Gaiden, but imagine it extended to the entire length of that story. It has some interesting nuggets for reasons we're gonna get into, but God knows we didn't need 30 or so chapters of fluff, and a lot of that isn't even spent on build-up. It's inconsequential things, that if you're reading it straight after enough time, you'll feel like your brain's leaking out of your head. But let's talk about the characters. The main characters in Toki Gaiden from the base story match their characterizations pretty much to a T. Amoeba, Jaggy, Juza, Rao, and everyone else who shows up don't do a single thing out of character. But you see, Toki doesn't either. Now, what was one of my main complaints about Toki as a character? I'll give you a second to remember. It was that Toki by himself is boring. Without interesting characters to bounce off of, he's painfully boring because he's just a good guy that we're watching do good guy stuff, which just isn't interesting to watch for the most part. Literally everyone else will carry the first 30 chapters of this story because they have, oh golly gee, I don't know, a personality? Amoeba's a maniacal schemer, which leads to him doing a lot of evil abstract things that are fun to watch. Jaggy's only in it for a small portion of the story, but hearing his thoughts on Toki possibly being a future problem along with his interactions with Amoeba were really interesting to read. Yuza drifting and trying to find meaning in his life, while I do think he is one of the weaker characters of this story, he's still fairly interesting. And what's Toki doing while they're introducing all these characters? Healing people. Riveting storytelling. Due to the other characters forcing him out of his comfort zone, we do get a few cool scenes with him, but since this is Toki's story, and the other characters obviously can't be on screen all the time, this leads to lots of boring moments, occasionally broken up by more fun characters appearing. They also have OCs too, and as to stay on brand with every other Gaiden, they're boring, irrelevant little characters, as you'd expect from Gaidens at this point. They might even be the worst ones, as they're pretty much just citizens. As much as I don't care for Frida or Rima, they are at least pretty memorable from that story. The Juza Gaiden characters, while I don't remember their names, I can remember their actions, like Terminator Boy or Mental Health Crisis. The Toki Gaiden OCs I actually forgot existed before I reread it because they contribute so little to the plot. They could be replaced with faceless, nameless NPCs, honestly. The lines they say could be said by anybody, and since they can't fight, they don't contribute very much in those scenes either. They're just little cogs to push the story along. Not much else. This is an issue because these villagers are meant to be what invest you in the first half of the book. But I don't know if you fellas know this. This is a prequel story. We already know how the events are gonna end, and let me tell you, it's not gonna be in Bubblegum Land. So it would take some character depth and personality to make you care about these people. And as I just explained to you, they don't have any of that. I'm not rooting for them to die or anything, but it's more of a, damn, that's crazy. Instead of a, no! Not Ramos! Oh, you writers, how could you do such a thing? The pacing isn't good if you couldn't get that from my first points. It's a painful slog for a majority of the story, with little things activating a neuron or two to keep you going. We all know how Toki ends up in the main story, captured by Rao and sent to Cassandra. It's usually nice to see what led to those events being here, but it takes so long to tie back into that, to the point where I repeatedly yawned and lost focus on the Protect the Village arc. After that is where the story definitely becomes interesting as a whole, but I do have one singular issue how they try to tie back into the main story, to be honest. I'm gonna go into spoilers for a moment, so skip to the time above if you care about that. Now, Amoeba gets informed how to disguise as Toki from Jaggy, so he imitates his gash and learns how to change his face to look like him. This is all while Toki's distracted dealing with Rao's forces and being captured. This gives Amoeba a chance to slink in and take his place. The problem is, Amoeba acts nothing like Toki at all, and I'm assuming he doesn't sound like him either. Also, we're all just gonna ignore the raccoon eyes, okay? I understand he has the scar, but they bought this being Toki way too easily, alongside doing all of his bidding. The kid OC doesn't buy that this is Toki, and Amoeba says, he must have gone into shock, I have to treat him. Then he orders his lemmings, the villagers, to grab him. And for some reason they treat it like it's a pressing issue, and the whole town then goes after this child. I don't know, I just don't believe they'd blindly follow him like this. Amoeba then says he'll use the clinic to make the people of the town into his guinea pigs, which means they should have caught on pretty quickly that he's Amoeba when someone probably walked out of the clinic with an eye hanging out of their ass and with a limp, but you know, I guess we're not going to talk about that because the story definitely didn't. These people respected and listened to Toki because he was treating them and protecting them like a savior. So in what earth did these idiots not catch on that he's fucking different? So much to the point in HNK 1, if you remember, Amoeba literally murders people in front of them and kidnaps people. It just doesn't make any sense at all to me. They don't focus on these fellas for the rest of the story, so you just have to assume they stay stupid, like I said, until Ken shows up. Which is a little bit of bad writing, if you ask me. There's also the thing of him sparing Zeed while killing off a lot of members of the gang, since, you know, named character prequel syndrome strikes back in this story like it did in Gaiden. Which indirectly means that you can blame Toki for this village being raided at the start of HNK 1. Now anyway, let me remind you something. Like I was saying earlier, other than all my nitpicks, when they start tying back into the main story at chapter 30 out of 50, it's not that bad. You come to find out Ryuga's the one that convinced Toki to stay in prison for Kenshiro, relating back to his whole who should lead the wasteland role. We also get this interesting character dynamic with Raoh, which and I'm pretty sure many others agree, that's when his character was at his most interesting in the base story. We get to see how he reacts to his brothers slowly becoming twisted, and I guarantee you an aspect no one expected to see in this story was him fighting against Raoh's mindset of just taking what he wants. They even give him an admittedly uncomfortable scene if you think about it for too long, where he thinks about taking Yuria for himself, but he fights against it. We also get to see his thought process when it comes to his final fight he had with Raoh, along with a few interesting extra details that were nice additions to his character. I don't care about good Dr. Toki, as I feel I've made obvious. Healer is such a passive role, and surrounded by a bunch of people who are nameless and forgettable, it's not a story I was interested in hearing about. Other than Amoeba stealing Toki's identity at the start, which was again, carrying the book, I wasn't exactly dying to see Toki help random people, because it's such an irrelevant detail to the overall story of HNK. It made more sense to just be briefly mentioned in a few moments, and not stretched out to 25 to 30 chapters. But his ideology clashing with Raoh and seeing his brother turn into this monster, Raoh's speech at the end saying he's the one who freed Toki from chasing him all this time. Things like that were amazing. Now, did they make the book worth reading? That's the real question. For me, yeah, kinda a little bit. I think this one's a fine read if you split it up into multiple days. The start's brain numbing, and if you read it straight with no breaks, it feels like brain rot broken up by far better characters here. It was excusable for Gaiden because, like I said earlier, it was short. This isn't that, and I think that's my main problem with it. This manga isn't bad, and it's not insanely good either. A majority of it fits into this middle ground. I'd describe it as mid with peaks for me, honestly. I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10. I think the peaks are really good, and if it was just those, I could see it getting a 7, but the starting fluff weighs it down so bad I'd leave it at a 6. If you're a Toki fan, I'd recommend it, as you'd probably love everything he does, but otherwise, if you got a free day and you want to read it in short bursts, I think that's probably the best way to read.
This review was the point where I decided I wasn't going to go as in-depth as I was previously, mostly only talking about the big events and moments in between chapters. There are two main reasons I did this. First, I didn't feel like doing the whole gather and edit pictures from damn near every page thing that I had done for literally every other review. I actually believe I took a good amount of the pictures already, but the thought of editing them all together was so arduous since this book was about the same length as Gaiden, I decided against it. Second, I didn't care about this story enough to dedicate as much time to it as I did the others. Ray and Gaiden were pretty easy for me. Gaiden was so bad I had funny or stupid material to work with damn near every panel. Gaiden meant a lot to me, so it wasn't hard to deal with that one. Gaiden was around the point where I started thinking it was unnecessary to talk about every single detail. Sure, the end half is good, but slogging through that first half objectively sucked. And that feeling is elevated by 20 times when you have to edit through every single moment. So as you can imagine, I wasn't exactly smiling ear to ear finding out Toki Gaiden was exactly like Gaiden, but about 5 times longer. I agree with this rating I gave it, and to this day, I've never thought about rereading it, despite the fact that I think there's a good story being told at that second half. I read Gaiden, and I wish I didn't read Gaiden. To be honest, I had seen one reaction image from this manga, it made me laugh for a little bit, and I never thought about it again. Till I remembered the fact that besides TNH, this is the only Gaiden, to my knowledge, that I hadn't read yet, so I decided to crack it open, and what I found was a story that was written. But let's not just take my word for it, right? Let's go over it together, and you'll probably see what I mean.
Our first chapter focuses on, well, Yuria. We open with Ken driving her to the Nanto Temple with his Jeep. And no, we don't get to see any more of Ken driving around past this. And yes, I'm just as disappointed as you are. While Ken and Yuria are talking, generic girl number 3, Saya, interrupts them, showing them a picture of a flower that she heard from her dad can grant anyone any wish and is a sign of good luck. Yuria seems upset when Saya mentions her father and Ken notices but doesn't say anything until they're alone, where he then asks if she heard the voice of the heavens, which she doesn't fully get the answer because instigator Jaggy steps in, talking about people dying in the Nanto village. To talk about Jaggy's design here, I'll play my live reaction to seeing it. Oh, that is not Jaggy. I don't know who the fuck that is. Bro looks like he's about to try and summon Sozin's comment. So after he makes fun of Saya's dad probably dying just because he can, he says something interesting to Yuria. He mentions how she can foresee events. So if the kid's dad dies, it would be her fault. This is a really interesting detail they randomly slapped into this story. In the following panels, the group visits Saya's village, and as Jaggy said, it's in shambles. Saya asks why Yuria didn't warn them, but then the dad mentions Yuria saved his life a bit prior, showing although she can see the future, she can't change it. To be honest, I like the idea of her having this ability. It adds a new level to her grief in the base story, literally knowing the exact fates of everyone who served her and how much pain Ken would have to go through in order to save her. But at the same time, it also feels really random to give her this. In the base story, it felt like she simply knew what her role was in the world and that it would cost multiple people's lives. That was the sorrow of her admittedly limited character. But her straight up seeing the future makes a few of her interactions feel a bit weird. You can recontextualize her jumping from Shin's tower, her knowing that the chariots would catch her. That's neat. But then you have to think about all the times she was surprised, like when Shin takes her from Ken or when Rao gets up from the rubble in front of her when they're trying to escape the Nanto tower. Things like that just don't add up. I know someone could jump on me for this because I like the anime only power she had, of being able to heal people or at least soothe their injuries with her touch, but that doesn't leave as many odd things to think back on. So while both somewhat fit her character, one is a lot less intrusive. Anyways, you're probably wondering why I went on that side tangent for so long. That's because that's the most interesting detail and thing that happens in this entire story. As I said, we'll go through it all together, but everything a little bit past this point is downhill, and we aren't even done the first chapter of 9. Back to the plot, we find out Saya has an incurable disease as she passes out. Yuria grieves with her powers as she sees visions of Saya's death. Ken goes to check on Saya, and she tells Ken the last thing she wants to do is pick the flower that she mentioned earlier for Yuria, as she loved Yuria as much as her dad. Ken then takes her to the dangerous mountain the flowers grow from and protects her from the dangerous wolves in the area, promising that she won't go into the next life unfulfilled. We then cut ahead to the next day with the two having the flower, and Saya getting up from her hospital bed to hand it to Yuria before collapsing, finally dying from her disease. Ken and Yuria then meet over Saya's grave, discussing how Yuria originally saw Saya's death as one with anguish and grief, but because of Ken, it changed to one of peace. They then go on to talk about Saya's feelings changing fate, and that when Hokuto and Nanto meet, miracles can happen. To be honest, I'm gonna let my inner Jaggy telling a kid her dad died side out for a second. I understand that fate's been changed with base H and K before, with Rei and only specifically Rei, but what did Ken really change? The circumstances of which the kid died at? I don't get why this is played like some hopeful thing for the future, when the fact that Yuria stopped the dad from getting bitten by that snake probably had a similar outcome. He most likely would have died a more painful, slow death from the poison than the random explosion killing him off screen in a few moments. I just find this bit a little goofy, personally. On to chapter 4. Yes, we're on chapter 4 already. When I tell you guys I skip a lot of downtime in these videos, this is the kind of shit I mean. It starts with us being told this is a story about two men who lose their lives for Yuria, which they aren't lying. The rest of the story hinges on these two characters. Now, I'll give you a hint. One of these characters is Shin. If we had to make a story with a good chunk of it focusing on him, who would you want to see him bounce off of plot-wise or get more lore for? Shin and Ken? They were mentioned to have been friends in the base story to some extent we don't know, so maybe them? Nah, couldn't be. Ken doesn't die. Maybe Shin and Jaggy? We know they have beef in the future. No, it'd be weird to say that Jaggy died for her. Couldn't have been any of the other main Nantos before the chairs because they hardly knew her. This really takes on anyone I'd be interested in seeing him talk to, so who's left? If you guessed Juza for some reason, you'd be right! The rest of our story has a major focus on Shin and Juza, two characters I guarantee you literally no one has ever said they wanted to see interact, especially so in a prequel, before the one big event that could tie them together even happens. Anyways, let's just get back onto the story. It starts with Shin having to stop his bike as he's unable to get past some trees on the road while he's headed towards the Nanto village. As he's sitting there, Yuria hops over some logs with her horse and lands directly in front of him, with him immediately finding her beautiful. They then have a bit of small talk introducing each other, and she says she'll send someone to help him, and to be careful around the bend as there's something to show kindness to, which is a weird sentence, and I'm gonna ignore the goat simulator face Yuria makes on this page. She then leaves, and Shin goes full incel, being mad that someone thinks he needs their help. And on to the next panel, I'll show my live reaction. He's like, I'm a man. I don't need help. I'm a choke a fucking fox. Why? Anyways, after that, he lets the fox go, thinking back on what Yuria told him literally 5 minutes ago, before we then cut to Shin getting the successorship of his martial art by combat. Yuria's in the crowd and he demands that she watch as he effortlessly destroys the fodder Groot put in front of him. He's declared worthy and then she asks Yuria what she thought of his display. And frankly, she's not impressed, saying he showed no compassion to his enemy, so he doesn't deserve to be congratulated by her. He then asks someone nearby what her name is and goes creepy incel again almost immediately. Our next chapter starts with 2 girls praying to a statue, to which Shin walks up like a caveman and immediately breaks it for the shiny rock on it to give to Yuri, to which she obviously refuses because he's acting crazy. He prepares to strike her when she says he's a sad man, but then Juza appears and can't help but intervene, saying the one line that every simple have a picture of and that you most likely will see if you're in the fandom long enough. He then says it doesn't matter how strong Shin is, since no one likes him, and the two begin fighting before they're interrupted. They then share a few lines that kinda show how a good chunk of the story is gonna go. Juice is gonna be our funny straight man, and Shin's gonna be our creepy "where's my hug at" Redditor trying to get Yuria. The story that I'm sure everyone wanted to see. We cut to a bit later, seeing Juza save a lady from a generic goon. We then quickly cut again to Yuria and her friend making small talk before Shin is mentioned, with Yuria saying that he must be entrusted with a great destiny, which if she can see the future, supposedly, this doesn't really make sense, but okay. Her friend then asks if Yuria can see her own future, to which she says she can't, but if she could, she'd be burdened with that for the rest of her life, which also really doesn't make much sense to me, honestly. Yuria's entire fate in the base story is intertwined with every single person she's close to. So, can she not see any of their fates since they're so closely connected to her? Or does she just see someone randomly getting kidnapped by Rao in the future and go, I wonder who that person is? It'd have to be someone I can't read the future of, which only applies to me. It's a small nitpick, but I think it's kind of stupid that an attribute they added in this story they could have done whatever they want with is probably the messiest, most nonsensical aspect of it. But anyways, we cut to Shin at the bar that Juza was just at, with him leaving just before Shin got there. As Shin's stewing around because he wants to get revenge on Juza, the ugly goon I mentioned earlier gives Shin a proposal to catch him. We then cut, I know you're probably sick of me saying that, but we do just legit cut everywhere in this fucking story, to Shin and a goon standing in front of a cruise boat, with Shin saying this is the day Juza dies. I do not know what's up with specifically Juza and why in 2 of the 3 Gaidens he's in someone's threatened to kill him for something that really doesn't matter, but it's whatever. We go to the boat's perspective, showing everyone enjoying a small little get-together, before Shin then kicks the door down and straight attempts to murder Juza here. They begin fighting and the fight is alright, I suppose. Juza kicks Shin through a wall and after that, I guess Juza put Aegis Reflector between them and they're just hitting each other's block. In all seriousness, it's probably one of the weakest fights in any of the Gaiden. But we then see Yuria's perspective, with her helping everyone get off the boat as the two continue fighting as the ship seems to be going down. Though when her friend asks her to come on one of the life rafts, Yuria says she won't be joining them. Right afterwards, the goon that came with Shin sets a bomb off on the boat, which knocks Yuria over, causing both men to pause. Which, sorry for my little interruptions here, but in a panel right before this, Shin knocked Yuria into a wall and didn't flinch. But when a random bomb knocks her over, he's like, oh, Yuria! Anyways, the group notices they're now sinking and they come together, with Shin casually being sexist again, and Yuria, in a drawing that looks nothing like Yuria even in this manga, says when 2 souls come together they can change fate, to which she then passes out saying she has no regrets. Shin and Juza then come together, spouting some cheesy generic Sonic and Shadow dialogue for using the power of teamwork to bust down this metal door, freeing them from the sinking ship. Yes, these two needed to come together to break a metal door. Juza, who kicked Shin through a wall casually earlier, and Shin, who has fucking Nanto, need to team up to punch a door. Let's just not think about that for too long. We then see the goon floating away on his own lifeboat, but as he gloats, Shin and Juza land on his boat and kill him within a matter of seconds. A bit later, we see Yuria recovering in a bed with her friend, and Shin with Juza in another location. The two talking about how Yuria said they have great destinies, putting aside their differences and making peace by putting faith in her, before both men go off in their separate ways, functionally ending our story, as the last bits are simply retelling what happened to them in base HNK. Well, that was a tale that was told. Now, how do I feel about it? This simply is not a story that needed to be told at all. You guys know what I say all the time. Gaiden should make us rethink events in the main story. The only one we stopped and talked about here was Yuria being able to see the future, and mainly because it feels like one of the messiest things to add to her character, and it calls a lot into question. Besides that, what the fuck are we supposed to do with the fact that Shin and Juza knew each other? They don't even interact in the base story or have any sort of connection, so why'd we talk about them in the first place? Let alone make their interactions the main fucking point of the story. Like, seriously, the book's called Yuri Gaiden, but once you get past the first 3 chapters, she's hardly in it. Ignoring the fact literally no one asked for these two, like I said, they don't even get anything interesting to do. The story isn't really focused on hard emotional turmoil like Jaggy Gaiden, or even a big bad like Ray Gaiden. It's just 2 dudes fighting over a girl, with one being a simp and one acting pretty normal. It feels like a boring filler episode. Yuri, I think, is an interesting character with a lot to expand on. Probably even more than 99% of the cast. But since she filled the distant damsel in distress role, we hardly got any time with her in Base Agent K. So it's kind of dog water when we finally get a story that's supposed to be all about her. She fills the exact same role. So let's get off of that, okay? Ignoring the fact that Yuria and the other 2 are hardly developed in this plot at all. There's one giant 7-scarred elephant in the room. In Yuri Gaiden, her fiance is barely in the fucking book either. You made a book with Yuria on the box, and you didn't include the most important character to her past the first 3 chapters of a 9-chapter story? What? Okay, let's bring it back a little bit. All 3 of our characters are in this weird love triangle, despite the fact she's taken. There would have been far more interesting interactions with Ken around. The aspect some pleasant and some purposely unpleasant people said I should have brought up in the last video was Shin's friendship with Ken, which for base manga I didn't find that important to mention for a handful of reasons that I'll show on screen. But admittedly, it would have been an aspect nice to see expanded upon. But here, it doesn't even seem like they know each other yet. And on the Juza, since Yuri is so important to him, it makes sense to tie him to Ken. Hell, Juza Gaiden goes out of its way multiple times to have him talk about Ken, and just like Shin, it doesn't even seem like he knows him here. Yuri hardly gets anything to do with Ken past Saya's death, despite the fact that the small moments between Yuri and him in HNK2 were really nice to see. So to see them in a lower stakes environment just being happy in between certain moments of the story, I think would have made it a real pleasant read. It's insane to me that you choose to execute this concept with him barely involved. And for my last kind of rambly point, the art style. You guys know I don't particularly care about art styles in these Gaidens. As long as I can tell who's who, I don't really mind. Problem being, if I showed you most of these characters, at a glance, I doubt you'd even know who they are. Yuri and Shin are okay, and Jaggy, if you squint, I guess you can tell it's meant to be him. But Ken and Juza don't look like Ken and Juza. Here's a fun little side activity for you guys. Send a picture of those 2 from this book to literally any one of your H&K friends, and tell them to guess who they are. They'll most likely just think they're generic love interests in a shoujo story. But anyways, I could probably go on, but let's just close on all this wasted potential. I'd give Yuri Gaiden a 4 out of 10. It's kind of like a shorter version of Togi Gaiden, but without the redeeming end half and just the boring first half. It's not inherently awful writing or anything, but the plot here is such a boring fluff piece. It hardly feels worth reading. There's barely, if anything, to look deeper into that would make you reflect on the base story, and I kinda just don't get why it was made. I personally wouldn't waste my time reading this if I were you.
This is the most recent Gaiden review, and probably the one I have the least to say on. The funniest thing that happened behind the scenes on this one was most likely me having to trim down on my bitching about the metal door scene, cause it was just horrendous writing, alongside a lot of the complaints I had about Shin just being an incel the entire book. There were a few in the version you guys got, but in the original script it was a lot worse. But with all that out of the way, that's been me talking about all the Gaidens. I want to know what you guys think. Did you enjoy all the Gaidens? Did you think they could have used some work? As always, I'm glad to discuss with you guys in the comments, and I've been M, and I am out.